Hello, and welcome back everyone to another video on Unreal Engine Audio. Today, we're going to be covering the topic of the level sequencer tool in the Unreal Engine. What I want to do is create a level sequence and have it move an actor around the level. As covered in the last tutorial, you can create a level sequencer in the engine by clicking on the sequencer panel and then doing Add Level Sequence. This will then prompt you on where you want to save it, but I will be showing you guys another way to do this. If we go to shortcut 9, if we open the content drawer, we can click on Audio, then Sequences. Once we're in this folder, we can right-click, go to Cinematics, and then click on Level Sequence to create this. I'm going to name this Mover, because we are going to be moving an actor around the level. Once we have that, we can take that and drag it into our level, and we now have our level sequencer ready to use. Now what we need to do is add our actor into the level sequencer. So if we go back to the folder and double click, this will open up our sequencer. So to add this in, all I'm going to do is click on the actor I want to add, right click in the track section, actor to sequence, and click add SM Stone Big var 678. Now we have our actor and a transform track. What I'm going to do next is add a few transform automations. If you forget how to do this, go back to the previous tutorial on a moving audio actor, and this will let you know how to do the transforms. One thing to point out is that our sequencer currently displays time in frames. If you want to change that, simply go over to the frame rate section and select Show Time As and then Seconds. I find this the easiest to work with as it gives you a better reference within your game. We now have this sequence set to move a rock back and forth in the level. But what if we wanted to add sound to this sequence? We do this in the same ways we did for the actor, but now we will choose the audio track option. Then we either right-click in the track or click on this Add Audio button in order to add audio to the track. Along with this, we can add as many audio tracks as we want. So as an example, let's have this play a stone moving sound when moving around the loop. So I'm going to choose Cave, Door, Moving. After we've done that, let's make sure that this audio is looping since we want this to be able to go on continuously. So we open up the WAV file and click Looping. And then if we save that, we can go back into the level sequencer. We can now adjust this to where we want and let it run as long as we want, all the way up until the end of the sequence. Try that out in the level. If you'll notice, nothing's happening with this, and that's because we don't have this actor set to autoplay. So if we go over to the details panel, we can move down and we can check this version of autoplay, which allows it to play automatically when the level starts. We've got our looping section, which allows us to decide if we want it to loop either indefinitely or an exact number of times. I'm going to set indefinitely. And then we can also set the play rate and the start offset. What this means is this will change how fast it plays through the sequence, and this will change where it starts in the timeline. We can also choose to have it have a random start time, or we can have it pause the sequence when playback reaches the end rather than stopping it. So now let's give this a shot in the level. As you can see, we now have this moving around and the audio is playing properly. But what if we wanted our sequence to be able to reverse itself, like when a door opens or closes? We could create a new sequence that plays the same actor backwards, but that would be a good amount of work and fairly tedious. Instead, we are going to be using blueprints to help us out. We click on the Blueprints tab up here in the toolbar, we can see the option to open the level blueprint. If we click on that, that takes us to the level blueprint. Now, this means exactly what you think it means. It's a blueprint that contains everything within your current level. The beauty of this is that if we want to add an object from the level into the level blueprint, all we have to do is select the object, open the level blueprint, and right-click in order to get a reference to that object. There we go. Once we have the sequencer in the level blueprint, we'll be utilizing two important nodes that we didn't discuss earlier. If we drag off our mover, we can type in play and choose play sequence player and play reverse sequence player. One thing to notice is that the engine automatically created this target sequence player when we created the play nodes. This is because the object that we pulled into the level isn't quite compatible with the variable type that the play buttons are working with. This is a very common occurrence and can make it hard to connect certain nodes. Now, let's make a quick demonstration event to show this in the editor. I'm going to type in keyboard events. I'm going to select Y. And then also going to use the node flip-flop, as we discussed earlier, in order to swap back and forth between play reverse and play. Now, if we compile and save this, that functionality should be implemented within the level. We can now set our level sequencer to don't loop and turn off autoplay, since we will now be doing that using the level blueprint. So let's go ahead and press play. So now if I press Y, moves that sequence forward. In order to make this a little bit cleaner, I ended up matching the length of these animations to the length of the moving sound, just to make it a little bit easier when we're in the level. So now if we press play, if I press Y, you can see that the sound plays and the stone moves in a circle, and then it stops. And so if I were to press Y, it would then play this track in reverse. While this seems to work, one issue that we have is that there doesn't seem to be any sound playing when we reverse the timeline. That's because audio tracks are only allowed to play forwards. So how do we fix this? While audio tracks are very helpful for straightforward animations, a more versatile way to have things happen is using event tracks. The difference between an event track and an audio track is that while audio tracks play sounds that you can place on the timeline, an event track lets you trigger events at points along the timeline. This can trigger events in the level sequencer, the level blueprint, or in individual blueprints as well. To get this going, first thing we do is add an event track just like we did with the audio track. We're going to click, go to event track, and then we are going to click on trigger track. Just grab that and move it under our audio. And since we're trying to have things work both forwards and backwards, the way that events fixes this is if we right-click on it and go to properties, we can see that it fires off events when forwards and fires off events when backwards. So what I'm going to do is for this first one, I'm going to uncheck fire events when backwards. Then I'm going to add another event track. And I'm going to uncheck fire events when forwards. This gives us two separate tracks that trigger things for one when it's going forwards and one when it's going backwards. I'm also going to delete this audio track as we will not be needing this at this time. Adding events to the event track is the same as before. We just move the playhead to where we want and then press either enter or click the small plus sign by the event. There's our first one. Then let's move to the end. Do our second one. Same for the bottom events track. Front, there we go. If we double click on any of these events, we are taken to what is known as the sequence director. The sequence director is basically a blueprint for the level sequencer. We can add in functionality, especially that relating to our trigger events on the timeline. As you can see, we now have a sequence event trigger that we can use to play or stop a sound. We can then rename this function to be what we want, in this case, start moving. Now, while in here, what we can do is when we start the rock moving, we can play the sound looping, and then once it stops, which is our second event, we can then fade out that sound. So let's go back into the sequencer and name the rest of these events. There's our second, third. I'm actually going to move these in that order because since we are running it backwards, we'll want the end event to happen first and the beginning event to happen second. Now we have all 4 of our events, so let's start adding in those nodes to play the sounds. So now what's going to happen is as soon as we either start moving it forward or backward, it will spawn this sound 2D, and then once it reaches the stop, it will fade out that sound immediately. So let's give it a shot in the level. As you can see, it's moving forward, and it plays a sound moving backward. Well, this is a very useful way to do this. Another way you can do it is by having these events trigger events within a blueprint. The actor that we added to the level sequence, in this case, was not an actual blueprint, it was just a moving actor. But if we were to have this within our level sequencer, we would then be able to access events within that blueprint and have these events trigger those, so then you could have this more well integrated into your blueprints. In this tutorial, we've gone over the level sequencer and its tools. We have shown how to create a basic level sequencer, add actors, audio, and events to a timeline, and how to have those events trigger functionality in our level. You should now hopefully be able to utilize the level sequencer in your game, as well as utilize it for interesting and more realistic audio animations. And as always, I'll see you in the next tutorial.